I don't want to hear it, man. I'm done with every thing. Just bring the motherfuckers out here, that's all. We got all the kids are in the house.
Okay, how many people?
6 kids, 1 adult.
Viewer discretion is advised for this educational documentary. Welcome back to Case Documentaries. I bring you true crime, disturbing stories and other things that you may later regret knowing, with regular uploads every week. And in fact, I'm uploading daily until the end of the year. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, and a special thank you to Lorraine Welch, who I somehow accidentally left off the legend screen for 3 months. So Lorraine, I'm sorry. But if your name is on screen right now, then you're a legend. Let's get straight into today's dark case. Donald Charles Spirit was born in 1962 in New Jersey and was often just called Don. Not much is known about his early life, but in 1985, he met Christine Jeffers, who would become the mother of his children. They had their first child, Sarah, in 1988, and were married a year later in 1989. Then they moved to Jacksonville, Florida and had 2 more children, Josh, born in 1991, and then Kyle, born in 1992. Don was known for having a bad temper. Members of the community referred to him as strange, unable to keep a job, and violent, especially with his wife. Domestic abuse was a regular part of Christine's relationship with Don, and often their children witnessed it. Most of Don's life was spent at odds with the law. In fact, by the time he was 51, he had spent more than 20 years of his life in and out of jail. Sadly, a cycle that his family were born into, and that perpetuated for the rest of their short lives. Dating back to the early 1990s, some of Don's felonies included battery, domestic abuse, traffic violations, felony possession of marijuana and firearms, probation violations, as well as depriving a child of food and shelter, and a hit and run while driving without a license. In 2002, in a fit of rage, Don smashed all the windows of Christine's car with a sledgehammer after threatening to end her life. When questioned by the police after the incident, Christine said she was afraid of her husband. However, she would not make a formal statement against him. Instead, Don agreed to submit himself for a mental health evaluation, and then he was diagnosed with a severe case of bipolar 1 disorder. However, he refused medication or help for the illness. This meant that he was known for having extreme, uncontrollable outbursts and issues with rage and depression. The sledgehammer incident occurred just 1 year after the death of his youngest son, Kyle. Many believed Kyle's death to be the start of what some considered the family spirit curse. Kyle was referred to as a sweet and loving young boy who loved playing outside. He really enjoyed fishing, basketball and soccer, and he dreamed of one day playing for the NFL. His mother used to call him Sweet Pumpkin Pie, and when he was just a toddler, he asked her to call him Applejacks instead, and this became his nickname from then on. In 2001, his father Don planned a week-long hunting trip for himself and Josh. Initially, Kyle was not allowed to join them because Don thought he was just too young. However, Kyle begged, adding that he wanted to do guy things and to be included. He claimed that Josh always got to do the fun stuff while he always had to stay behind. Eventually, his father gave in and brought him along, but only if Kyle promised to stay in the hunting stands and just watch. Don insisted that Kyle was not allowed to handle a gun or to go out hunting with them. On November the 8th, the family arrived at 3 Lakes Wildlife Management Area, which is close to Kenansville in Osceola County, Florida. They spent the next few days waking up at 5:30 a.m. to go hunting and were wearing the typical bright orange safety vests that they needed to. Don was carrying a .300 Browning rifle. Josh was carrying a .270 Browning rifle, and as instructed, Kyle was unarmed, walking alongside his brother and father and not partaking. On the Tuesday night, Don cooked up a large meal for him and the boys, and he planned to leave the following morning. So far, the trip had been unsuccessful, so by the time Wednesday morning rolled around, the boys begged for one more try at finding a deer. The family went out on a 2-hour hike and still no luck. It was rainy and gloomy, and at this point, Don was far past ready to go home. As they were packing up the truck, Don was rubbing oil onto the barrel of the rifle. He apparently muttered something like, "There's rust on the barrel," prompting Kyle to lean forward to see what he was saying. And then Don accidentally hit the trigger, and the gun went off. Kyle was hit point blank in the head. This was in front of brother Josh. In shock, Don frantically tried to call 911, but there was no signal. He put Kyle in a truck and then drove back off the campsite to find help. A man named Mike Evans witnessed Don speeding and pulled over to the side of the trail. Once he saw what had taken place, he claimed that it was clear that Kyle was fatally injured. His life had barely started. Mike Evans stated that the incident was the most horrifying thing he had ever seen. En route to the campsite, Don eventually got through to Christine, and she contacted the sheriff's department, as did several of the hunters at the campsite who realized what was going on. Witnesses say that Don was lying over his son's body, screaming, and several of the hunters were afraid that he may end his own time on this earth, too. They tried to usher Don away from his son, but he was inconsolable. Others kept their attention on Josh, the son and brother who had witnessed this gruesome event. They tried to take care of him. One hunter told Josh that he would have to be strong now. Police arrived on the scene, and while many believed that the event truly was an accident, it was discovered that Don had previous felonies, and therefore was not allowed to handle a firearm. As a result, Don was sentenced to 3 years in prison for a felony possession of a firearm. After the incident, Christine opened up to reporters, explaining that the family was not coping and that she was particularly worried about Don. Sadly, the family were unable to pay for Kyle's funeral expenses, leaving them in a difficult financial position. Still, Christine insisted that Kyle be remembered as the sweet boy who bought his brother a bike after saving up his allowance for months on end. He was her Applejack. During the time that Don was in prison, the family moved to a mobile home in Bell, Florida, and their financial struggles only worsened. Bell is a small agricultural community. At the time, its population was just over 200 people, and the small community is known for being close-knit, even though the majority is living below the poverty line, and things weren't easy. Christine was concerned that Don may end his own time on this earth whilst locked up, especially whilst dealing with the grief of Kyle's death and missing several family milestones. Josh turned 13 and their first grandchild was born too. Sarah, the oldest of Don and Christine's children, became pregnant at 17 and was working at a fast food restaurant and a local grocery store. Just a year before Don would be released from prison, Christine filed for divorce after 20 years of marriage. After he was released, however, Don gained sole possession of the mobile home, and his daughter Sarah, now 19, already had 2 children with a third on the way. For the most part, his remaining children and his new grandchildren all lived with him in the mobile home. The father of Sarah's children, Edward, was also known for being in trouble with the law, and he was in and out of the family's lives. This meant that Sarah found herself as a single young mother, with only her father to depend on, especially since her mother, Christine, had become distant since her divorce from Don. By the time Sarah's third child was born, the family had very little food, and Sarah began running into welfare issues, having the Florida Department of Children and Families, or the DCF, called on her multiple times. According to neighbours, one of her children was found alone on the street, and he had bruises and bite marks, and he was holding a sharp kitchen implement. Another, younger than 4 at the time, had an inexplicable broken leg. The family would spend many years chaotically interacting with the DCF, often being reported on by neighbours who claimed that Sarah would leave her children in crack dens, and many of the write-ups reported substance and domestic abuse, medical neglect, and inadequate supervision. However, the DCF continually stated that the children were not in danger. It was not until 2007 that the children were removed from Sarah's custody, which sent her and her brother Josh into a downward spiral of substance misuse and crimes such as larceny. However, this removal was only temporary, and after a series of promises of getting clean and of participating in community welfare programs, the children were placed back in Sarah's custody. By 2008, she gave birth to her fourth child with her new partner, Jamie. At this time, they were living with Don again, and this is when Sarah started reporting Don to the police for physical abuse. On August 27, 2008, Sarah called the police claiming that Don had shoved her up against the fridge and that he had aggressively grabbed her face on either side. When the police arrived, Sarah had red marks across her face, but ultimately she chose not to press charges. This may have been because Sarah's new partner, Jamie, was also having trouble with the law, and Don was her only support otherwise. By 2011, Sarah's substance addiction had worsened, and the next 3 years marked a steep downward spiral for the family. They were now constantly embroiled in cases with the DCF, along with law enforcement, and by then, Sarah was also being reported by school teachers who stated the children came to school hungry, dirty, and were often injured. One of Sarah's children, Caleb, had cut his foot open by mistake and it became infected after Sarah cleaned the injury with bleach and then wrapped it up in tape. All the while, Don's mental state was worsening too, and his frustrations with his daughter and her children grew. Neighbours stated that he was often seen yelling violently, and that the family were always having fights. It's unclear whether he saw the children as a burden, but he definitely had a strained relationship with his daughter and didn't agree with how she lived her life. Sarah had failed the Better Parent welfare program and now discovered that she was pregnant with her 6th child. As a result of failing the program, the state was less inclined to help her financially, and therefore it was around this time that Sarah, with the guidance of a family friend, Colleen Stewart, turned to escorting, a decision which then raged Don. On September the 18th, 2014, at around 3:30 p.m, one of Don's neighbours claimed to have seen Don angrily pacing up and down the street, looking as though he were looking for or waiting for someone. The neighbour says he remembers it distinctly, as he only ever saw Don riding his bike and never normally walking. While we don't know exactly what happened during this time, we do know that Don made this 911 call at around 4 p.m.
Gilchrist County 911, what's the address of the emergency?
Yes, ma'am. I just shot my daughter and shot all my grandkids, and I'll be sitting on my step, and then when you get here, I'm going to shoot myself.
What is the address that you're at, sir?
2550 Northwest, 25 Terrace, Don Spirit. Every one of them are dead.
You said your name is Don Spirit?
Yep.
All right, Don, what kind of gun do you have?
It doesn't matter what kind of gun I got. They're all dead, and then when you get here, I'll shoot myself, and then you figure out what kind of gun it is.
How long ago this happened, Don?
I don't want to hear it, man. I'm done with everything. Just bring the motherfuckers out here, that's all. You got all the kids are dead in the house.
Okay, how many people? Okay, how many people?
6 kids, 1 adult.
6 kids and 1 adult?
Yeah. One of them is a baby.
All right, Don. Is there any way you can stay on the phone with me till I get somebody there to help you?
What's that?
Can I have you stay on the phone with me?
No, not that. I'm waiting for them to get here. When they get here, I'm going to shoot myself on my back step. All I'm doing is waiting for them.
So you're sitting on your back steps?
Yep.
Okay, Don.
Officer Adderhold, who knew Don, arrived at the scene. He found him quickly pacing at the back of the mobile home. Adderhold identified himself to Don and instructed him to put up his hands. Don complied and stated that he was not going to hurt him. He was, however, cursing, and he appeared out of it. Don yelled that Colleen Stewart had turned Sarah into a whore. He went on to state, "I am tired of them all, and I've taken care of it today." Don continued to yell that he killed them all and Sarah's dead too. Eventually, more police show up, and Don became less responsive to their questions. Finally, Don used a .45 caliber handgun to end his own time on this earth. But that was nothing compared to what police would find next. When officers entered the mobile home, they found the remains of all 6 of Sarah's children, and this included her youngest, an 11-week-old baby girl. Sarah too was discovered under a tarp, no longer alive. It appears that she was running away when the trigger was pulled. She was just 28 years old. How do you think we could avoid something like this happening again in the future? What are your thoughts on this case? Please do let me know down in the comments. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.